Hello directors, today we are talking about constructions, which is week 14, and this week is fun because there's a lot of art and drawing, and it's a little bit of a breather before the kids are heading into Blue Books. So it's kind of like this nice refresher before they're heading into Blue Books, which shouldn't be stressful, but I know sometimes it can be a little bit. So the first thing that we do is interesting integers. I think based on the handout, I wrote down that the number is 7. So I'd set a timer for a few minutes, let them talk about 7, write through details about 7, all that type of stuff. The other thing I didn't do last year, but if I was directing again this year, I would do this. I would bring a bunch of toothpicks. I would pass out a bunch of toothpicks to each of the kids, a couple dozen, pass out a bunch of mini marshmallows, and then give them a minute to build some sort of structure, because I think it engages them, it gets them interested, it talks about construction, and then I'm going to reference to it a little bit later too. So set a timer for a minute if you want to do this. It gives them some hands-on. It's a way to construct something, which ties very nicely into the theme, and it's something that makes it fun, and we always like trying to make it fun. And then the next thing is to say, where are we? And so they should look at the compass page, see that we are still in 2-dimension. So we are still in 2-dimension. And then we move on to the cover, which should be about no more than 10 minutes. I started with telling them what this is. So the cover is The Geographer by Johan Vermeer, who is a Dutch artist. And so what do you see here? What do you notice? And so they started talking about that he looks like, he's drafting, or he's working on maybe making maps. They all notice, oh, he's making maps just like we make maps, because they're doing a lot of that, at least in the Challenge A classes they are. And he has a compass in his hand, they may have noticed. And he has some other, you can tell he has other sketches in here down on the ground. He has a globe up above over here. Some of them might notice that there's some Roman numerals along the wall. And if you're having trouble seeing what it says, it has M, D, C, L, X, V, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and so I went ahead and wrote this on the board and let them remind me what the numbers are. And I said, go back to your chart for week 2 if you need it, which most of my kids did not have all their other charts with them. So I just helped fill in the gaps when they forgot how much something's worth. But the M is 1,000. The D is 500. C is 100. L, they might notice from football, is 50. Because we're at 51 or 2 or something like that for the Super Bowl this year. X is 10, V is 5, and then you have your 3 right over here. And so you end up with 1668, which is probably the year that Vermeer drew this. So you have that. That's kind of fun to incorporate that into this as well. And then we have the quote. And then on my notes, I put Fry's quote states how man reflects an aspect of God's creativity, right? Something that he's created. And so the geographer is paying homage to God by making a map showing God's creation. And then we have the reflection. And then I just put a little note on here in Genesis 1:26. It states, I am God's workmanship created in his image. And a little note here that constructions are evident all throughout the Bible. So we're given great detail about Noah's Ark, like exact dimensions and a bunch of details, the tabernacle, the sanctuary, the temple, and Solomon's palace. Enough to be able to actually replicate some of these things or look for them. I just heard recently they're looking, they think they maybe have found the spot for the Ark. I think it's somewhere in Turkey. So it's kind of cool. We also talked about, had anybody in our class been to the Ark Museum? And so they were able to talk about that because I think one of the kids used to live out east and had actually been to the museum. So that's what we talked about. And then you can say any other comments tied to constructions, and then we go ahead and jump into it. So dialectic now. I always have the open-ended statement, tell me everything you know about construction. But my class didn't always like jump into answering that. So then we would start having like specific questions. So this would be a good example to say, did you have to have really exact construction technique when you built your little structure with your toothpicks and marshmallows? And they might say, no, you know, it doesn't really matter. Generally, I have a wall here, I have a roof here. I kind of just had to throw it together. I only had a minute, so it wasn't very exact. But if I'm asking you to build an 80-story skyscraper in New York City and people are going to live up there, do you think the constructions need to be exact? And they'll say yes. Hopefully they say yes. You care that those constructions are very precise and exact. So that's one of the reasons we're talking about constructions. Also, I don't have this on my notes, but it's important to know that, I mean, the ancient Greeks used geometry. Euclid is like the father of the geometry text that some places still use to be able to see how shapes line together and prove things with the shapes. And so all of these constructions, this has been around a long time. It's very classical, and hence we're learning about it because we do things classically. Common topic questions. So again, you're just picking, you know, one or two of these, whatever interests you or your kids. Compare duplicating a segment with different tools. And so I think what I mean by this, I wrote these last year, so I'm always trying to remember what I was talking about, is how, let's say I have, I should use my little straight edge on here to make it exact. Okay, so I have my triangle. Wow, I have my angle. I didn't end up making that very straight. But you can use tools to reconstruct things, and they actually do a problem like this. So if I pull out my compass, if I have my compass and I take a point right here and I make my mark, and then I can mark that, I can do a straight edge and I can mark over here. And this is not going to mark because it's not a dry erase. This is what I tried to do in class too, is hold my compass and stick a little dry erase marker so that I could get it to make my nice little line. All right, that kind of worked. So if I had a straight line over here, then I can make that same mark. And then what I can do is at that point, pull my compass in so that it goes from here to where that other angle hits. And I can pull this in and it's about right here. Now, again, you almost have to tape this to this so that it's always hitting at the exact same point that you want it to hit. Okay. So my 2 points didn't come together. If I'd had perfectly done this, my 2 points would come together, and then that intersection is the point where I can draw this. That angle doesn't look right, but I would make my new angle. So by using the tools, that was a really sloppy demonstration. It's easier to do these things on paper and then try to show to the kids. The other thing you can do, because a compass is so small and it's really hard to deal with the dry erase marker, the better thing to do, and I just didn't have any with me where we're traveling, is to have a string. And then if you tie a little like washer to the other end of the string, you could tie anything that's heavy, but I like a washer because it has a hole in the center. And if you just hold your point and then you, let's say this is my string and I have a washer right here. If I'm just holding this in place, this becomes my measurement, my point. This becomes my pendulum, right? Where the string is moving along. So I can draw with my marker where that washer is, and it's going to give me those same angles. So it's going to act like a compass, but it'll work better when you're dealing with a large board and you need a bigger space and you're trying to show the kids. So just bring a string with something tied to the other end. If it's a little washer, it's nice because you can just stick your dry erase marker and then swing around and you kind of have this giant compass with you. So I would use that if you're going to try to draw this on the board. If you only have a few kids in your class, you guys can all just work with paper and the little patty paper right down in front of you. But if you have a larger class like I did, you're probably having to put stuff up on a board. Okay, the next thing is define circle. And so here's my really poorly drawn circle. Okay. So a circle is a set of points equidistant from the center. So each one of these center is equal distance, and that distance, of course, is the radius from this outer edge or outer circumference. So we have the same thing in a compass. So we have this point, which is kind of like our center, and then we can draw a bunch of little dots or little points or connect all of those points together, and that makes our circumference that is equidistant from the center. So we're creating the same thing. Next thing, circumstances. Under what circumstances might you use patty paper? Okay, patty paper, one of the other tools they need for the week. So real quickly, the tools they need this week, they need a compass. Doesn't have to be this fancy, but these are nice. I got these off of Amazon, and it really locks into place so that it's not moving around. The compass I remember having like as a kid just was flimsy and would always fall apart when you're trying to draw things. These are nice and exact, and they have a bunch of extra pieces that it comes with. They need some sort of double edge, straight edge. So it doesn't have to be a ruler, although that's probably the easiest because they probably all have one. But it just needs to have two edges that are both straight on the two edges. And a ruler is nice because it doesn't have a lot of distance between the two. And on some of their student problems that they're doing, they're having to make parallel lines. And so if you can have a book, and that can have a double edge, but then you're dealing with a very big space between the two. So a ruler has just a nice simple space. So that's their double edge, straight edge. And then the last thing is patty paper. Now I bought these as a director, and because you get so many, I just gave a bunch out to each of the kids in my class so that by the time we got to this week, they had this as part of their books when we started out the school year, because I had a feeling people were not going to know to buy this. And so their parents were going to come up to week 14 and say, what's this patty paper? And now I can't get it in time and all that. So plus you get, a ton of pieces. I think actually the first time I ordered this, I got 1,000 pieces. I'm never going through all that. So I actually gave that to our next Challenge A director of our next year because I wasn't directing anymore. And then I forgot that now my next daughter is using these. So I ended up needing more. Okay, so the patty paper, what is the patty paper? It goes between hamburger patties. So they're these little 4-inch square pieces. They are kind of like tracing paper because they're pretty see-through. See, if I put it up against the circle, you can see through it. It has a little bit of a waxy feel, but it lets you trace. So you can put this over and then trace, or it lets you see through it as you're folding points and stuff, and it makes a nice crease mark. And so they will use this on their example problems. If they don't have patty paper, they can just use regular tracing paper. It just won't necessarily give them a nice crease on the marks. They're gonna have to see where the marks are and then make their lines, versus this stuff. Let me show you. Oops, okay, I tore that so much I actually tore it. I didn't mean to crease it that hard. Okay, so I bent this right here, and you can see how it leaves this mark. So you have this really nice clear mark. I don't even have to go back and draw over that because you can see where the crease is there, where I folded it. That's what the patty paper is really helpful for, versus regular tracing paper probably won't do that, and computer paper can be hard to see through. So that's the purpose of the patty paper. And then why might you use patty paper? Well, patty paper is really nice because of those things. You can trace, you can see that crease, but what might be a limitation? Well, what if I had something really large I was measuring? These little patty sheets are only 4 inches square, so that's not really going to work very well for that. So that's where, string or yarn or something might do a better job at measuring a long distance. Next 5 common topic, what is the relationship between angles and direction? I'm not quite sure what that means. These are all coming from the little tutor's guide of what to talk about. So angles and direction. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what I was getting at for that. Sorry. And I don't know how that, what they're meaning about that on how it relates to what they do for the week. So I'd have to go back and watch the tutor video to remember what that's about. But then my last thing says, why does construction yield exact results, but measurement yields approximate results? So this could be, so the measurement, here's a good example. This is, I think, what we did for this, is I had brought like a little jelly jar from home, and they all had a ruler, and I said, measure this for me. Actually, I think we did it on our centimeter, millimeter side, measure this for me. And just write down, don't say your measurement, just write it down and then pass the item along. So we passed the item along and everybody did a measurement, and then we compared our measurements. And do you think that they were exactly the same? No, they were never exactly the same. They were usually off by a couple millimeters. So that's why measurements are somewhat approximations versus construction. If you're using the exact tools, you get those real precise details. You can really get it down to that most specific amount. And so, yep, that's what we did. Use a ruler, measure the same item, show how you got a different measurement. Okay, then we are moving on to the Memoria and arrangement page, which this week I think looks at a lot of angles. Yes, so it looks at corresponding things for lines, triangles, stuff like that. They're starting to get a little bit on the naming of, the same side angle, like some of those abbreviations and the naming for that. If they feel comfortable enough with what they probably should focus on is what have they already seen? What do they already know? They've seen this in previous weeks. And actually one of my next pages in the lesson plan, yeah, it shows you what week Dr. Gilpin went through and labeled what week have they seen everything, because they've already seen everything that is on this page. Doesn't mean they have it all memorized. I don't even have this all memorized. So, but what do they know? They probably know a lot of things on here. Maybe they can make a little check mark or a smiley face by all the stuff that they already know. And then it helps them start saying, well, what do I not know? And do I kind of understand what it's saying or telling me? So having them start to look at that and understand it. And then how else could you arrange this? Or is there any other ways that it makes sense to you and you would put it together? Okay, and then the chart. So what is familiar, what is unfamiliar? I think the biggest thing to know on the charts is that they are given some details on how to make the different constructions, and they're going to do those constructions in their student pages. The way it will work is the first page of every fourth page. So those are how they repeat, right? So if you're doing the mastery method, which is what I teach in Math Explorers, you do the pages that are all the same. And so you're kind of learning that one concept for the day, and then you do the pages that match with that. So for example, page 1, 5, 9, and 13 are all going to have stuff about patty paper constructions. And so they'll be using their patty paper to make different shapes, or they're taking a triangle or a circle and then they're doing chords, diameters, different lines, bisectors, things like that to make other shapes and see the different patterns. So those first pages that first day is patty paper construction, and that's for 1, 5, 9, and 13. And then the next day moves on to the next concept, which will be their double edge, straight edge, and they're all doing constructions on that. And then all those things match, and the charts match up to those things. So on their, all the secondary pages, so 2 and 6 and 10 and 14, I think that's right, are all going to be straight edge, and it's all going to be on chart 2. So the charts this week really nicely line up to what they're actually doing in their pages. If they're struggling or they can't quite figure out how they're supposed to do it, sometimes it is hard to understand by reading the instructions how they're folding that paper together to make the different items. So that's what they're working on. And and the really fun thing, the page 4, so like page number 4 and 8 and 12 and 16, I think that works out, is all geometric art. And so that is kind of stuff like this, where they're making different shapes and patterns and fun stuff like that. So those day 4 pages are really, it's kind of like a fun treat day, which is nice heading into a Blue Books week. So that's the main thing on the charts, is just make sure they understand that their chart pages correspond to their student pages, and how do they correspond, so that they know where to go when they're looking for help. Okay, and then the key concept for the week is sketch versus the concept of actually constructing. So this is maybe one of the simplest examples. So I can sketch a square. If I told the kids, draw a square, they can probably all draw something that looks like this, and that's great. That's a great sketch. But if I constructed a square, well, one, I would have my straight edge so that I know I am making it exactly straight, and it would be measured. I could even use, there's ways to use your compass to get the angles on here to make your perfect edges. The other thing is that if this is indeed a square, I would have to indicate that by showing that all of my sides are the same length, which we're going to show with those ticks right there. And then all of my angles are 90-degree angles. And we indicate that with those little boxes. And so I can see this as a mathematician. I see this and I say, that's a square. I can say, that looks approximately like it might be a square, but that tells me this is actually a square. And so that's the kind of exact measurements we're talking about, or the exact constructions we're talking about. Yeah, drawings are measured and approximate, and so constructions are exact. And I show an example of how you get your 1 point, you use your compass to make that other line, kind of like how I opened up with it, to make the one line and then make the other line, and that's how you get your exact construction of that triangle. Underlining concepts of construction, 2 points will determine a unique line, and every point on a circle is equidistant from the center. So as long as you have those 2 rules, you know that other truths will apply to your constructions as you're working with them and building them. All right, so that's about it. You can do aha moments or anything from last week on circles and ellipses. And then if there's anything they wanted to talk about, the book club video, not for this year's book club, but if you go back to last year's book club, they will actually take out some patty paper and show you how to do a few of these. Yeah, you can have them work through. I mean, the top of page 1 is pretty much just having them like draw a circle on here, so you can show them how they do that with their compass. A lot of them are probably familiar on drawing with a compass, and you can have those safety compasses, and that works too. Okay, yep, see, I'm horrible with, when I do this, well, up on the board it's hard. It's easier if it's flat, and actually, instead of moving the compass, I do much better to move my paper and just keep my compass in the same spot and let the paper glide around, and I get a much better circle when I do it that way. So, okay, that's what I'm doing here on my paper. I'm spinning my paper. Oh, beautiful. So it's so much nicer when I just let my compass hold its point and I spin the paper around to make my circle. I find that works a lot better. So they'll do something where they're doing this, and then they're showing how you can, if you fold and you have the 2 sides align like this, and then you make a crease. If you open that up, that crease is going to be an example of a diameter. So that's just showing us a diameter. If we don't have it exact on the center, we just fold a crease that goes somewhere else on the circle. That's an example of a chord. So just kind of showing some of those things that we talked about last week on our circle discussion, but now they're actually creating it on their patty paper and seeing how that applies. And then they'll do some more specific ones on bisectors. And so maybe you go through one of the bisector examples where they have a triangle. They'll just take their student book, they'll trace the triangle that's on there, and then they take their, they're gonna fold their paper and make some bisectors and stuff and have those come together at the points, the center points. So you can go through a couple examples just so they see how to do that. This should be a pretty fun week for them to go through these and see that. It just might help to, if you want to go through, pick 1 or 2 that you have done ahead of time, know how to do it. And like I said, if you go to the book club from a year ago, I think they walk through a few, and so you can see how to do those so that you at least have a few hands-on ones to work through with the kids. All right, don't forget about the week 29 booklets. This is a really good time to kind of remind them about that as we're hitting this mid-year point. And then walk through the catechism. They probably know that pretty well by now. And I think that is it. So this week on Math Explorers, I actually go through and I show them how to do, I show them a video of how they're doing all their different types of, here's a bisector, here's how we're going to find it, here's how we fold our paper, because some kids reading the instructions is not really helpful. It helps to actually see the folding and how that works in process. They're just more visual that way. So for those of you who are using that, you can also go there to see how to fold a few of these before you head in to do your direction. Okay, thanks for watching. Is your student easily frustrated with math? Are you worried a new math program will put them behind? Help your child navigate the math map by becoming a Math Explorer. Math Explorers is a supplemental program to assist with Math Map Complex or Math Map Monomials. This online program offers a weekly schedule, daily flashcard practice, daily video lessons and practice problems, weekly assessments, office hours, and more. Your student can watch from a desktop computer or through our app. Build their confidence, boost their retention, and set them up for math success with the Math Explorers program. A low monthly subscription fee makes it affordable, and you can cancel anytime. Visit mathexplorers.net.